I mean, you imagine being in this situation where every single person bows down except you and your two buddies, and you stand up ramrod straight, realizing what you've got yourself into. And that's the picture. This picture, by the way, comes from the Children's Bible. People say, what version do you read, Pastor Mark? This is the one. Just so you're aware. I love the pictures that help us explain the story.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
You would be amazed at how few opportunities I have to wear these pants. These are not rentals, I own these. You really think, what were you thinking when you bought those? I don't know, I just thought I'd have more opportunities, that's all. Well, you know, I'm a big fan of Michael Jackson music. I don't know if you are or not. I want to talk about this song, I'll Be There. And it was the first and the greatest hit of the Jackson 5. Came out in 1970. And not only was it their biggest hit that Michael, of course, sang, but it was on the top song for Motown Records for 10 years running until Lionel Richie finally bumped it aside. And you might know that part of the story, but here's something you probably don't know about the song I'll Be There. That when it was written, it was based on Matthew 18:20. Where the scripture says, where two or three are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of them. And it's sort of interesting to me how pop culture borrows inspiration from the scripture again and again, rarely giving credit where credit is due. But see, all real inspiration comes from the scripture. And so sometimes when there are those songs that, people think it's talking about a romance. It's not talking about a romance at all, unless we're talking about Jesus' love for us and the fact that he will always be there. And that's my simple truth today, that regardless of what situation you're in life, where you are, what you're doing, Jesus is always there. Psalm 139 says, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? He said, if I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, behold, you are there. And I just want you to think about something. If we could get a revelation, an epiphany of the fact that Jesus was always there at every moment of our life, wouldn't that revolutionize the way we lived? I think it would. Let me give you a little example of this. A couple of weeks ago, I was with Kathy and we were in the mall shopping. Probably my favorite thing in the world to do, seriously. And so she's off in the women's section and I'm in the men's section and I'm poking around and I'm at the shirt rack and I'm always at the clearance rack, that's where I go. And I'm standing at the clearance rack and there's this man and he's got about a 3-year-old daughter with him. And I just can sort of see them and I'm looking at the shirts and, I feel sorry for these 3-year-olds. They go through their whole life looking at everybody's bum. And I mean, that's the height that they have to live their life at. And so anyway, she kind of lost track of her dad because he was around the other side of the rack. And she walked over beside me and saw a pair of jeans like he was wearing, only they were mine. And she grabbed a hold of my leg. And so there she was, this little 3-year-old clutching onto my pants thinking I was her father. Now I'm standing there, I mean, what do you do when you got a little 3-year-old that you don't even know clinging? You don't kick him away like a cat. And so I'm standing there thinking, this is kind of an awkward moment for me. And so then I thought, well, I'll just sort of clear my throat and get her attention and she'll realize I'm not her father and wander off. So I went, she looks up and sees me and screams bloody murder. And she just starts screaming her head off. Now, I'm used to that sort of thing because I have that effect on women. So I wasn't really surprised, but she was in absolute shock. Within like 2 seconds, her dad is there and picked her up. And of course, immediately she stops crying. And her dad's holding her like this, and she is leering at me and giving me the evil eye like I'm some sort of perv. And of course, by this time, all these people in the whole place had heard this commotion, and I'm sort of standing there trying to look innocent and try to pretend I'm not some sort of pedophile. I mean, it was really super awkward moment for me that this 3-year-old imposed on me. But all of a sudden, I realized something. As long as she knew her father was there, she felt comforted and safe. As soon as she thought somebody else was there, she was in panic mode. And I thought if we could begin to understand that wherever we are, whatever we're doing, that Jesus is always within arm's reach from us, it would change and revolutionize our life. And that's what that song is all about. I'll be there. Call on me and I'll be there. I want to show you a verse today that I think is sort of interesting. It's from Isaiah 43. And this is what it says, verse 2. And I want you to listen carefully to how it's worded. It says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flames scorch you. Did you notice that it said when, not if? It didn't say if you go through the waters. It didn't say if you go through the fire. It said when you go through. And I think everybody in this room knows what this is talking about. That you will face your waters and you will face your fires, these two metaphors. And I just put it in this simple way. Sometimes you're over your head and sometimes you're going through the fire, right? I think every one of you knows what it feels like to be over your head in something, right? You get into this situation that you thought you could handle, and the next thing you know, you're feeling over your head. You take on a job that you thought you were qualified for, and you realize you aren't, and you're over your head. You borrow some money, and the next thing you know, you're over your head in debt. You get yourself into a relationship, and you realize in this relationship, you're over your head. I know a bunch of you are saying, what are you talking about? I'm talking about marriage. What do you think I'm talking about? So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about a story that is familiar to many of you. And it's the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And we know where this story is. It's in Daniel chapter 3. It's a favorite in Sunday schools, and little kids growing up all know this story because it's an incredible story. Now, I think you could agree that these guys are already over their head. I mean, we had King Nebuchadnezzar. He went into Israel. He attacked the country. He sacked the city of Jerusalem. And then he took some of the young men, and he took them as captives to the city of Babylon. And so here these guys were. I want you to think about it for a moment. They are in a foreign land, in a foreign culture, in a foreign religion, with a foreign language. They don't fit in at all. And they're already, I would call them already over their head. But they are about to go through the fire. Because this king was a little bit, I don't know how else to put it, he was just a bit narcissistic and totally into himself. And King Nebuchadnezzar builds this tower of himself, this statue out of gold, 90 feet tall. And so he erects this statue to himself, and he calls it the Trump Tower. I don't know what you mean. That's that other guy. I always get those two guys mixed up. My apologies on that. And so he erects this tower. I don't know what he calls it. And he has his grand idea. He says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have a great day today. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to play the music. We're going to play the horn and the lyre and the harp. And we're going to play all this music. And when you hear the music, the entire kingdom, what you do is you bow down and you worship my image. So the music plays and everybody bows down, except for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And I love this picture, if you look at this picture, because this is, imagine what it looks like. I mean, you imagine being in this situation where every single person bows down except you and your two buddies, and you stand up ramrod straight, realizing what you've got yourself into. And that's the picture. This picture, by the way, comes from the Children's Bible. People say, what version do you read, Pastor Mark? This is the one. Just so you're aware. I love the pictures that help us explain the story. And so anyway, when these three guys don't bow down to the statue, it says Nebuchadnezzar is furious, and he summons the three men, and he's standing before these three men, and he says to them, okay, guys, maybe you're new in town, and you don't know how it works around here, but how it works around here is when I say something, people do it, and when I say bow down to me, you need to bow down to me. So you know what? Because you're new, I'm going to give you another shot at this, and we're going to play the music again. We're going to do the whole thing again. And we're going to play the music and the horn and the harp and the lyre. And then when you bow down, if you'll bow down, it's all good. But if you don't bow down, then what we're going to do is we're going to heat a furnace up 7 times hotter, and we're going to throw you into the fiery furnace. So that's Nebuchadnezzar's threat. And we're going to pick the story up, Daniel chapter 3, and we're going to pick it all up in verse 16 and see what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to say. Verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, We have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. How many think that's a nice, bold-faced statement? I mean, does it get any better than that? These guys totally understood what faith was. Not only did they know that God was able to deliver them, but they knew God was willing to do it. And see, that's the absolute definition of faith, is not only knowing God is able to do something, that God will. John told us in his epistle, he said, if we ask anything according to his will, we know we have the petitions that we ask because he hears us. And so that's the definition of faith, this bold and incredible declaration that our God will deliver us from your hand. The next verse, however, becomes extremely problematic. And let me show you why. Let's read it. The very next verse says this, but if not, let it be known, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And here's why it's problematic. Many of the commentators, and you can go check this out for yourself, they say that when they said, but if not, means that if God doesn't deliver us. So I want you to think about that. Do you see how that's a problem? If this was a faith statement that our God is able and our God will, and then the very next thing out of your mouth is, but if not, and you're saying, our God is willing. On the other hand, he might not. You know, you never know. Then it negates the faith statement. Are you following this? Secondly, it makes no sense whatsoever. If God doesn't deliver them from the fiery furnace, then they've become crispy critters. How do they bow down and worship anything? It is a nonsensical answer. A lot like Yogi Berra. Do you remember Yogi Berra? The baseball player, not the bear from Jellystone Park. There's a big difference. And everything he said was always convoluted. And he used to say this. He used to say, if you don't go to other people's funerals, they won't come to yours. That doesn't make sense, just like this doesn't make sense if what they're referring to is the fact that God's not going to deliver them. So what you need to do is you need to read those two statements together. They are both in reference to the threat that they're going to be thrown into the furnace. So the first one is, if that is the case, our God is able to deliver us, and he will. But if not, if that is not the case, if you don't throw us in the fire, we're still not bowing down and worshiping your gods. Doesn't that make sense? So there's this great bold statement. Then what happens is this absolutely infuriates the king. So he does what he threatened to do, and he heats the furnace 7 times hotter. Then he takes these 3 young men and he binds them up, and he has his mightiest and his greatest guards, and they take them to the edge of the fire to throw them into the fiery furnace. Who remembers what happens? They were consumed. The guards were consumed by the heat just getting near. But I guess they succeeded in pushing them into the furnace at the last moment before they died and fell by the wayside. So then these guys fall into the furnace, and what happens next is incredible. And we have to jump down a few verses to see it. It's in verse 24. And it says, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste and spoke and said to the counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? And they answered to the king and said, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. And here it is. And they are not hurt. And the form of the 4th one is like the Son of God. I want you to think about this. Jesus said that you will go through the fire, and he says you will go through the deep, and I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. They ended up in the bottom of the fiery pit, and who was there to meet them but Jesus? And for some reason, and don't ask me how, some reason Nebuchadnezzar knew that that was the Son of God. Isn't that sort of interesting? He said the 4th one looks like the Son of God. And so Jesus shows up, and he's walking around, and they're unhurt and they're unharmed. And so he calls them out, and they come out of the furnace. Interesting, only 3 come out of the furnace. And he's totally impressed with their faith, and he's totally impressed with what happened and this miracle. And so we're just going to jump down to verse 27, and this is what it says. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men on whose body the fire had no power, The hair on their head was not singed, nor was their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them. How many remember the days that you couldn't come out of a restaurant without smelling like smoke? Right? Do you remember those days? The whole smoking section? I never understood that. Having a smoking section in a restaurant's like having a peeing section in a swimming pool. So here's what I want to do. I want to draw some conclusions from this story, and I'm going to give you 3 things today, and I'm going to throw them up on the screen. The first one is this, is that you will never go wrong doing what is right. The second one is Jesus will never be late, but don't expect him to be early. And the third one, you will never be let down if you don't give up. You can never go wrong doing what is right. These 3 young men did what was right. They resisted an incredible amount of peer pressure, and they stood up against the whole cultural ethos of the day. And here's what I want to tell you. Each and every one of us are confronted, not every day, but often through our lives, we will be confronted with situations where we will have to bow down to a cultural ethos or a value, or actually ask to do something wrong. And what happens is we kind of go with the flow, because that's the kind of people we are. We are wired to follow along and to conform and to be uniform with everybody else. You know, it was Peter Marshall, the chaplain to the U.S. Senate, who once said this: if you will stand for nothing, you will fall for anything. Let me give you a dramatic example of this. How many of you know who Ed Snowden is? Ed Snowden worked for the CIA, then with the NSA, the National Security Agency, and he was a computer developer, and he was in his 20s actually. Started with him when he was only 20 years old, and he had developed this software that actually enabled the CIA and the NSA to spy on electronic media. And what they were doing with it, and over the course of a number of years, he realized what they were doing with this software was they were using it to spy on Americans. And the U.S. government was spying on their own citizens. And all 300 million citizens in the U.S. essentially were having all of their emails and all of their Facebook and all of their Twitter and all of their phone calls all recorded and monitored. And when he realized what was going on, which was clearly illegal, clearly unconstitutional, he couldn't take it any longer, and he decided and knew what he had to do. At the time, he was stationed in Hawaii. He was working for the NSA, and he decided he was going to blow the whistle on the U.S. government. Now, understand something, that this was not just one particular party. It was both Democrats and Republicans, and it happened during different presidencies. And so it wasn't a political thing, a partisan political thing. So he decided he was going to go to the media. So he flew from Hawaii to Hong Kong. He spilled the beans, gave them all the information. He immediately got on a plane, and he was flying. He went through Russia, through Moscow, and then he was going to go to South America, where he was going to go hide. But what happened, en route from Hong Kong to Moscow, he got his passport pulled, and he was stuck. This is 2013, stuck in Moscow, and he has been there ever since. He is considered a traitor. If he ever goes back to the U.S., he will be convicted of treason, and he will either go to jail or possibly even be executed for what he did. But he was unwilling to allow this to carry on, and he had to decide what to do, whether he was going to do what is right or wrong. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, wait a minute, Pastor Mark, he broke the law. He had to steal that information from the NSA in order to leak it to the media. I don't know if you notice in this story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that these guys actually broke the law. Did you notice that? They were breaking the law by not bowing down. Do you know that Daniel, a few chapters later, he actually got thrown in the lion's den? You know why? Because he broke the law and he prayed to his God when he wasn't allowed to. You know that in the New Testament, we have these people that are thrown in jail and beheaded for preaching the gospel because they were breaking the law, preaching in the name of Christ. Do you know that we have translators that we as a church sponsor in the country of Nepal that are translating the Bible, and every single day they go to work and break the law? And you are supporting them, and therefore guilty by association? You're all going to hell. Now, I'm not trying to defend the fact that how he did it was illegal. When I look at what Ed Snowden did, I marvel by the fact that this was a young man, he was only 29 years old, and he thought, I have to be willing to stand up and do what is right, no matter what it costs me. This needs to be known. He gave up a life in Hawaii and a $200,000 a year salary, and now he is a fugitive living possibly for the rest of his life in Russia. He said, I'd rather be without a state than without a voice. You can never go wrong by doing what is right. You want to know something? We almost always know what the right thing to do is. We almost always do. We're just not sure we're willing to do it. There's a story of Mark Twain, and he says when he was 14 years old, he went and he stole a melon off a street vendor's cart. And he went into the back lane and he took a bite of the melon. He says, as soon as I bit into the melon, a strange feeling came over me, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. So I returned the melon to the cart, and I got a ripe one. So the first thing is this, you can never go wrong doing what is right. The second thing is this, that Jesus will never be late, but don't ever expect him to be early. How many of you have noticed that? This story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I don't know. I think that the fact that they ended up in the bottom of the furnace before Jesus showed up, maybe that's not late, but it's late-ish. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, when they were making that big statement that their God was going to be able to deliver them, weren't you thinking, maybe any moment, Lord, show up? Then they're bound and they're getting taken to the edge of, they're going, now, Lord, now would be a good time. And then the guards beside them are dying from the heat. I'm thinking, really good time. And then you get thrown in and you're falling to the bottom of the pit and you're thinking, any microsecond now, Lord, would be good. All the way through Scripture, you see it again and again and again, the story of the raising of Lazarus. Jesus heard that Lazarus was sick well before he was dead. And when did he arrive? 4 days after he was in the grave. And Mary and Martha said, if you had been here, our brother would not be dead. Is that true? It's true. Jesus would have, healed him. Then we have the next story, the raising of Lazarus, or Jairus' daughter, rather. And Jairus' daughter, when Jesus heard about it, she was only sick. But by the time he got there, what? She was dead. I don't know about you. It seems late. It seems late-ish at the very least. But I want you to think about this. In both those stories, the greater miracle was raising someone from the dead, right? Not just healing the sick. And those are extraordinary stories because Jesus was, in our mind, late. And he says, though you go through the waters and though you go through the fire, I will be with you. And what happens is when we go through those situations is when our faith actually grows. And here's a thought, too, I want you to think about. If Jesus is always there and always with you, how can he actually be late? He's already there. And so it's really a matter of us beginning to understand that he's already there. We just need to wait for him to make himself known, if I can put it that way. So first, you need to remember this, that you can never go wrong by doing what is right. Number two, that Jesus is never late, but don't ever expect him to be early. And the last and the final thing is this, and it sort of goes with what I just said, is that you will never be let down if you don't give up. You know what? Here's the thing, people. Every single one of us will face the fires. Every single one of us will go through the waters. Every one of you will have challenges in your life, and you need to remember that he is always there. Just call on his name, and he'll be there. I want to close with one final story, and it's probably the most painful story that I've ever told you. A personal story about a time where Kathy and I went through a fire that no one should ever have to go through. And when we had our first child, our son Jordan, he was this really healthy young boy, I'll call him that. By the time he was 6 months old, he weighed 26 pounds. People didn't call him Jordan, they called him Jumbo. He was so chubby and fat and rolls of fat. By the time he was a year, he was 36 pounds. And, he had these ripples of fat going down his arms and his chest. We used to dress him up in a Speedo and take him to the beach, and he'd walk down like a little bodybuilder. He looked like a miniature Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. And he had no hair. He was bald, too. And so he just walked down the beach with these little ripply rolls of fat. And we would take pictures of him, point and laugh and stuff. And so we really were enjoying our first child. And you love your kids no matter what they look like. You get that. And so this is what happened when he was about 15 months old. He got sick, and he was vomiting and sick, and And so, you know, we put him to bed and did what you do as parents, and you try to comfort him and care for him. And the next day he wasn't better, and the next day he wasn't better, so we took him to the doctor. And the doctor said, oh, he's just got a little flu, you know, it'll pass in a couple of days. A couple of days later, it hadn't passed, so we took him back to the doctor. And the doctor said, well, looks like you might have a little ear infection. Here's a little amoxicillin, you know, banana flavored baby medicine. And so another few days went by, and he still wasn't any better. At this point, it was day 10. And he had not gotten out of bed in 10 days. And he wasn't eating, and we were forcing him to drink. And it was clearly there was something wrong with this kid, and the doctor wasn't helping us. So we took him to another doctor. And so this is the third visit on day 10. And this doctor took one look at him and said, you get in your car and you drive to the Children's Hospital and go right now. I'm going to phone ahead. And we said, what's going on? He said, just go. Just go. And he wouldn't tell us what was going on. So we got in the car. And we went down to the Children's Hospital, and the next thing we know, they're doing a spinal tap on our little son. And then they came back, and x-rays and different things, and they came back and they said, your son has bacterial spinal meningitis, Haemophilus influenza B. They have a vaccine for it today, but they didn't back then. And pleural pneumonia, and your son is very, very sick. And they said, we're going to try to save him. But you need to know with how advanced this is, there's a good chance he might be deaf, might be blind, good chance he could be mentally handicapped. And I remember saying to the doctor, I said, well, what's the good news in all this? And he says, well, the good news is he's not dead yet, and we might have a chance to save him. And you know, as a young couple, you can't think of a more painful experience to go through than having your child in that kind of discomfort and illness. And so he was hooked up to tubes and IVs and all kinds of things. And this ordeal went on for 21 days. And 21 days, there was no sign of improvement. And in this whole time, we were praying and praying. And one day during our prayer time, I came across a verse in Psalm 91. And it says, and he shall call upon me, and I will answer him in his trouble. And I will deliver him and honor him. And with long life, I will satisfy him, and I will show him the salvation of the Lord. And I knew in that moment that God had given me a promise and a word for my child in that moment. And if I could hang in there and believe that he would do what he said he would do, he said, with long life, I will satisfy him. That's what the scripture said, and show him my salvation. And so we prayed that prayer every day up until the 21st day. And at the 21st day, the fever finally broke. And our son began to mend, and finally they let him out of the hospital on about day 30. Remember, he was 36 pounds when he went in. He came out weighing 16 pounds. He had these skinny little legs and skinny little arms, and he didn't look anything like he had looked his entire life. He could no longer walk. He could no longer talk. He was intimidated by crowds and other people and wanted to be held all the time. And we thought, what are we going to do? And we thought, you know what? We're not going to coddle this child. We're going to let this child face life and face the world, and we're going to teach him how to walk, and we're going to teach him how to talk, and we're going to make him face crowds, and we're going to bring him to church, and we're going to make him interact with other babies, and we're going to believe God's going to totally restore him. At this point, we didn't know what damage was done to him. Well, we just plugged away at that. And those of you that know my son today will know that he's 6'3", 225 pounds. He's a computer engineer doing his MBA at the moment. And ladies, he's single. I'm not one for quoting Friedrich Nietzsche, but I will this time. Anything that won't kill you will ultimately make you stronger. We need to realize that Jesus will always be there. Greater is he who is in you than he that is in the world. And if God be for you, who can be against? Let's stand together, shall we?
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.